Hi, welcome back to Minimalcast. This episode is going to be about how to test your app. This is going to be exactly what I do to test integration with QBO. Okay, I'm going to be starting from my Minimalcast GitHub repo, but I'm going to be under the branch account. And the reason I'm using that is it just adds an account model for persisting tokens, because the original Minimalcast doesn't do that. It uses sessions. All right, let me go into launch up my tmux shell, and okay, let's make a new branch called spec. Let's go to the gem file. All right, I'm going to update the QuickBooks Ruby gem there. So let me go over here. BU. That's B. Let me just write that out. I use BU for bundle as an alias. So let me do bundle update QuickBooks Ruby. Okay, I'm going to update that. I'll be back just in a second. Okay, that bundle went fine there. Let me go back over now. I'm going to put the gems here I'm going to be using for testing. So let me just go down here. And I'm going to continue with cut and pasting just to save time on these screencasts. Who wants to see me type after all? But here's just adding better errors, and Spring commands are spec. So I'm on Rails 418 that has Spring, and I encourage you to look into using Spring as well. And I need that for RSpec. And in my test group here, I'm going to have RSpec Rails, Factory Girl Rails, VCR, and WebMock. These are sort of the notable ones. You go read about VCR. I probably know about it already. It is just a wonderful tool for testing APIs because it's a name, VCR. What it does is it records the transaction you're making with the API for you. So it makes a VCR like a record button, and you can play it back, you can re-record over it. Makes things so nice for testing, and it needs to use a mocking library. So I'm going to use WebMock with VCR. VCR, you can use many different mocking, stubbing libraries out there, but you need to pick one. So you got to pick one there, put it in there. I'm going to do a bundle now. So I'm going to do a tmux send. That's at TS down there. BU, another alias for bundle. Send it over to the right side, and the bundle is complete. Let me go and also install the Spring bin stubs. Oops, we're getting an error here. All right, it's saying I need the gem. Okay, yeah, this is Rails 4.1, but my gem file was from Rails 3.2, so I gotta do Spring in here. Let me do a bundle. Should be pretty fast. It is. Okay, let's run this command again. And I got another error. Maybe it doesn't need the dash there. Okay. Right. That. Okay, so it's installed. And they were already installed, actually. Okay, so it has the bin RSpec. That's what I was looking for. That's what I'm going to be using in this screencast. And that BE, by the way, so BE Spring bin stub all, the command I just run. BE is another bash alias. I use them a lot, but I want to make you aware of them. My bash aliases, that is. Okay, time to install RSpec. And we're going to use the Rails generator to do that. RSpec install. Okay. Now you may notice too, if you're a little new to the Rails, or this is a RSpec 3.1 thing, I believe. There's now a spec helper and a Rails helper. And the reason there's two of these is the spec helper is supposed to help you separate out things that are not Rails specific. That way you can have, perhaps, if you don't need Rails, that way you can put stuff in the spec helper and just run the spec helper and not load in all the Rails for your tests, the Rails dependencies for your test. The Rails helper is sort of like the spec helper before. You're going to put a lot of stuff in this as it's Rails related. It also created an RSpec, if you notice. I believe this is new as well. And this will require your spec helper every time. So that's your, and gives you color right off the bat. Okay, so that's something new too, I believe in 3.1. I don't know when they added that exactly. Okay, let's go to open up the spec Rails helper. Let me make this a little bigger. Oops. How about that? Okay. Here's where we want to get in the VCR information. So we're going to require VCR. Just two configurations. I'm going to add another two later in the screencast. Going to put the cassette library directory in spec VCR, and then we're going to hook into WebMock here. Okay, save it. Let me also do Factory Girl Rails 2. And let's just take a look at the bottom of this file. I'm going to keep all this stuff here. Oh, this is just all the boilerplate things from RSpec, but let me add Factory Girl syntax methods. What that does is all you have to do is, instead of using Factory Girl .create every time, you just use create. Okay, so I saved it. Alright, speaking of Factory Girl, let me make a factories RB and get this and explain this. Okay, so I'm going to make an account factory. That's why I was using this account branch of MinimalCast, because when you're testing, you're going to need some sort of persistent way. Well, I guess you don't need a persistent method, but it would be very difficult. And it's not like what you're going to do in the real world. You're always going to be to your database persisting the QB token, QB secret. So what I got here is basic account, and here I'm using environmental variables to pump in this information, and you should too. Now, how do you go and get the token and secret? Now, you could just run the MinimalCast app, hit the connect to Intuit button, run through those steps, and grab it that way. However, there's an easier way to do that. You can go to log into developer@intuit.com, go to your app that you're working with, and okay, and you can do. All right, so I clicked on MinimalCast there, and you can do a test connect to app right here. You don't need to go out and spin up the MinimalCast. And not only that, even if you did that with the MinimalCast, you're gonna have to, like, you know, put on somehow display that to the screen, a debugging, like using something inside the MinimalCast Rails app. Anyway, this is a faster way to do it. Just click on Test Connect to App, and that'll display the token and secret. Of course, you're going to need your company ID as well. And that's just the basic factory we're going to need to get started testing. Always remember too, if you're going to do environmental variables, make sure you source them in where you're going to be running the specs. So I'm going to be running the specs over here in this pane. So I would source my profile if I was just making a change. Doesn't do any good to do it over here where you're going to be running the spec on this window pane in this shell. Now let's get into I'm just looking at the spec directory. So we need to create a directory under spec. Now you can't use controller specs to make external requests. So it's either going to be an integration spec, which are called now features, spec features directory, or I'm going to use the requests directory. I still think that's a valid one because this is kind of like going to be like a controller test. I don't want to do a full feature test, but I guess I could. But anyway, you need to either use one of those two directories. I mean, you cannot use like a spec controllers directory. It will not, RSpec does not allow external requests. So let me make a requests directory. In there, I'm going to I'm just going to call it QB spec RB. I would make it more specific in the real world. But I'm going to cut and paste some boilerplate code here for creating an invoice. Now notice instead of spec helper, we got Rails helper. If you remember from that .rspec file, the spec helper is being included, but we need to include the Rails helper. Okay, so here we just have a basic spec, all right, with a describe, and here we have an it block. Now I'm using my QuickBooks base gem, and check out the screencast there if you don't know why it's good to use. And I'm just pumping some stuff. So we're talking to the sandbox, so you can just, there's like, I don't know, 20 customers on the sandbox, so it's actually pretty easy nowadays to do some testing on the sandbox because you know stuff is going to be in there. So I could just really randomly pick out some IDs. I don't even know which one customer ID 2 is, but I know it's going to work because I know how many customers are in there. And I'm just taking this from the spec that's in QuickBooks Ruby, making a line item. Again, I can throw an item ID in there because there's quite a few built-in products or items inside of the sandbox. And okay, so here we go down to how to use VCR. Now let me try to make this just a little wider. All right, that's as wide as I go, huh? Okay, so here I'm going to there's different ways to do this, but the most basic way to use is VCR .use cassette. Now here I'm putting in, if you remember, we're going to be making cassettes in oh no, it's up here. Here's our library directory, which is spec VCR. So this is going to be spec VCR QBO invoice create, and you want to use subdirectories very liberally here to help you organize stuff, and it will create all these if you don't have these, so you can just keep on adding them there and it'll make it for you. I'm going to start with record all. There's 4 options. I usually use record all, record none, and inside of that is where we're going to do the base service create. Okay, the base service was, I made that above with the QuickBooks base gem, and when we create the invoice, we want that inside of the cassette. So we don't need these calls inside of the cassette, just the call out. All right, now let me make the window even here. Okay, save the file. Okay, let me show you something I do a lot, and let me just comment out this. But before I even send the request, I want to take a look at the XML, or you can take a look at Okay, QuickBooks Ruby Gem does all XML. Okay, so yeah. One thing you can do, so I have everything in this invoice object. I can do this to look at the XML before I'm ready to send it. And let me see if I have a okay, I'm looking for an alias. Actually, it'd be under VI. Okay. I'm just seeing if I have an alias to run a spec over here. Okay, let me just run the spec now. And I can do that bin rspec spring command. So let's take a look at this here and see how it runs. Okay, so I ran the first spec. I took off the expectation. Now I'm going to go in this right pane. What I'm trying to show you is how I usually work in my workflow. I usually look at the XML first before I even send it over a live request, because you will make a bunch of stuff in your sandbox, and you want to keep the nonsense down to a minimum. So let me go over to this right pane, and you can see here's the XML. So I can just take a look, see what's going on here. Yeah, everything's looking good. Got my customer ref right there as well. And I use that just quite a bit, so I wanted to show you that. And so let's take that off now. Now, before I run the spec, I want to filter out my sensitive information. I don't really care so much on my sandbox, but you're going to care about your, I mean, you should care about it. I mean, you should get rid of it, even if it's your sandbox. You should filter out that information. Let me get to that. Also, let me just show you too, what, by adding those rspec, or this, excuse me, this factory girl syntax method helpers, I don't have to do factory girl create here. I just do create. So that's nice. That's why I added it. Let me go back to the Rails helper, go back to that thing I'm talking about, the sensitivity, editing out sensitive information. And VCR has a way to do that. Looks like this. And a little hard to see. Let me widen the screen there. Alright, so it's config filter sensitive data. Now, you have to look inside of the requests. I'm going to show the requests in a second after I run, excuse me, when I say the request, it's the cassette records the request, and in there's an access token, and you want to edit it out just like this. Okay, you want to use uri.encode www form component, and then stick your access token in there again using your environment shell to do that. Same with consumer key. All right, and this guy needs to be indented. All right, let's save that as well. And because I'm making a change, I wonder if I need to stop Spring on the rspec calls. All right, let me do bin Spring stop. Okay, just stop Spring, just so this definitely reloads. I kind of forget whether it does reload or not. I'm not sure. All right, let's go and finally run a real spec over to the sandbox. All right, so let me comment out this. Let's double check this here. Okay. Sending the spec now. It's going to take a little bit of time because it's making a live call out to the QBO sandbox. Okay, so we got a failure. Let's see what that's all about. Okay, I need to scroll up to see what it was. And yeah, that's what I expected, because if you noticed over there, my expectation was a hard-coded result ID of 158, because I've done a few tests already, and we got 159. So that pretty much means it went through successfully. Now there's other ways to test. I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. I'm already going on 19 minutes here. So it was 159, so let's put 159 in. And I'm going to now, since I did a successful request and it was a successful invoice, getting an ID, now I'm going to do record none. And this is the state you're going to have when you commit your specs in to Git. You're going to have them in this state, and this will run quite a bit faster too. So let's rerun it now. And just, oh boy, ran in 0.45 seconds. And it was successful. So let's take a look finally and see what happened over what these actual cassettes look like. So we're saving it in spec, VCR, QBO, invoice, create, and these are by default in YAML. You could have them in XML as well, which is kind of a nice thing to do if you want to work on a QuickBooks Ruby feature, the gem, and you want to submit in your specs. Well, you can do some live tests here, sandbox, and then grab the VCR XML to put into your pull request. Anyway, let's go look at the create. So it's all in the YAML format, which is nice, easy to read. And we still get the XML here. I'm just scrolling down. If you remember where I put the filter sensitive data, access token, customer key, boom, takes it right out there. So there it is. Want to cut it off right here. That is going to get you up and running, starting with getting some automated tests to QBO v3. Any questions? Hit me up on Twitter or at my email address. Thanks for watching.